Welcome to a journey through the history of Nybo Jensen Konfektion, which begins in a car in 1961.
Det startede ved, da vi var på vej til Herning.
It started one day on the way to work. I said to Margit that we should start our own factory, and she was horrified.
Jeg var meget forskrækket i starten, men jeg lod mig overtage.
I was quite stunned at first, but I was persuaded into learning how to sew and cut, and that was the beginning of it all. 50 years later, Nybo Jensen Konfektion delivers around 800,000 items of clothing every year to hospitals, care homes, laundries, restaurants, retail chains, and so across Northern Europe. But let's see how Nybo Jensen Konfektion grew to become one of the biggest suppliers of top-quality work clothing. In spring 1962, they started making hospital clothing, working from their house on Nye Shivai in Viborg. Our first order was for 60 aprons. We thought to ourselves, my goodness, how on earth are we going to get all the sewing done? Today, the sewing takes just a few minutes. The order was delivered and plenty more came in. The early years were hectic. Their daughter, Helle, was born. The number of employees at the house grew to around 15, and lights burned there until late in the evening every day. Margit was responsible for the design and production of hospital clothing, while Peter was the salesman, selling the clothes on his one day off every week from his job at Uno X, where his work involved planning petrol stations. He managed to build 200 of them before eventually going full-time at Nybo Jensen Konfektion. What I consider a good deal is if I'm up against a good rival and I manage to win the order because I offer a little extra quality in clothes features. I love that kind of thing. Peter made a lot of deals like that, and by 1966, the house had long since been too small. Nybo Jensen Konfektion moved into an old potato warehouse. Of course, it wasn't built as a sewing workshop, so when it got really cold in the wintertime, we used to have to move the machines 2 to 3 meters away from the outer walls to make it bearable to sit at them. As money came in, they invested in new machines, so the factory could expand even more. Even back then, their production was more efficient than that of their rivals. In the mid-1960s, Peter spotted a new business opportunity, supplying clothes to laundries who leased them out to clients in industry or the service sector. We discovered that this was a brilliant market, and we got into it immediately. We have got a lot out of it ever since. In the beginning, we produced clothes with a very elegant and tight fit because our users wore torpedo-shaped bras. Then came the liberation of women, and in Copenhagen and other big cities, they started burning bras in protest. This meant a higher demand for loose-fitted and more comfortable clothes, so I had to change everything. It was also in the late 60s that Peter began to sell abroad, initially to Sweden and Norway, then Germany, and then the business gradually spread throughout Northern Europe. In 1972, Peter and Margit bought a plot of land in Viborg for a factory. They were actually planning to wait before building the factory because their financial situation was quite bad, but the bank said, "Why don't you just get on with it right away? We'll back you. Just get started on the building." The number of employees continued to grow. There were about 50, and in spite of the oil crisis, Nybo Jensen Konfektion still managed to increase its turnover in the 1970s, so that by 1977 they had to extend the factory. They also hired an extra salesman. Until then, Peter Nybo had managed by himself to bring in enough work to keep 70 people employed. As a curiosity, we could mention that it was in 1980 that the factory erected one of its first wind turbines, long before this became fashionable. In 1988, Nybo Jensen Konfektion also got into clothing for butchers and grocers in a big way. This came about through their purchase of Skenmode. By the end of the 80s, they began to suffer from competition from sewing workshops abroad, who were paying their workers much lower wages. Nybo Jensen Konfektion had a very modern and efficient production process, but they still had to give in and move their workshop to Latvia.
Det var,
It was tragic, because some people had been with us for more than 25 years. But we had to make structural changes. It was a kind of life or death situation. About 120 local employees were let go in 1992. On the other hand, sewing workshops were established in Latvia, and in 1999, Nybo Jensen Konfektion opened an ultra-modern factory there, which today produces the majority of the company's clothing. In 2002, the company received the endorsement of Her Majesty Queen Margrethe II as a supplier to the Danish royal court.
Vi synes, det var en stor ære at få lov til at lave tøj til kongen.
We thought it was a great honor to produce clothes to the royal court. It was a little tricky at first,
Og man kan se dem på Danmark.
but the outcome was some very nice jackets, which can be seen on the royal yacht, at the big royal banquets, and the royal drivers use them as well. At the age of 75, Peter Nybo stood down as director of the company, but the next generation had already been part of the firm for a long time. Daughter Hella is a buyer. Son Jakob is responsible for IT and administration, and over in Latvia, Anders makes sure the factory runs smoothly. It pleases Peter greatly that his children wanted to be involved in the business.
jamen, jeg synes, det er spændende.
It's exciting because we have no conflicts.
Noget som helst.
There are other family businesses and companies
Der er også andre
where they argue about everything.
bestyrelsesmøder og andet, de skændes og
We never have any of that,
alt mulige ting at sige, ikke?
ever.
Det har vi aldrig nået af. Aldrig.
Today, Nybo Jensen Konfektion is a well-oiled machine, dispatching 12,000 pallets of clothing out to its customers every year. Throughout the years, top quality has always been the company's priority. The clothes are hard-wearing, colour-fast, and incredibly easy to wash. The company's logistics are in good shape, and Nybo Jensen Konfektion can usually offer customers next-day delivery. But there are also other virtues that have brought the business steady growth over the past 50 years. When we take people on, we go for people who are smiling and cheerful, people who know how to enjoy life, and that means we can take that attitude with us to our customers. All in all, our customers are always guaranteed an experience when they visit Nybo Jensen Konfektion in Viborg. Customers are greeted with a real cannon salute. And thus, Nybo Jensen Konfektion enters its next 50 years with a real bang. And there's a bang every now and then at home with Margit and Peter, because the two founders are still involved in a number of exciting projects in addition to their board work for the company.